The Curse of Crow Hollow, a tale of terror and mystery. Do you believe in curses? In a remote village near Appalachia, a terrifying legend exists, a curse so malevolent that it can bring death to anyone who defies its rules. This is the story of Ethan, a young man who dared to confront his family's haunted past, only to discover that some doors are better left open. Literally. Ethan, a 30-year-old businessman, grew up hearing cryptic warnings about his ancestral village, Crow Hollow, nestled deep in West Virginia. His father's voice would tremble whenever the name was mentioned, and his strict orders were clear. Never go there. But deep down, Ethan was curious. Why was his family so afraid of this place? What secrets did it hold? One fateful business trip to Charleston gave Ethan the chance he had been waiting for. Ignoring his father's warnings, he decided to visit the village and see his ancestral home for himself. As Ethan approached Crow Hollow, he noticed something strange. Google Maps didn't recognize the village. He had to ask locals for directions, and their fearful glances only added to the mystery. When he finally arrived, the scene sent a shiver down his spine. The village was eerily quiet, with not a soul in sight. Every house had two doors, one large and locked, the other small and ajar. It was as if the entire place had frozen in time. Ethan's uncle still lived in the family's ancestral home. Ethan knocked on the large door, but received no response. Frustrated, he entered through the small door and, out of habit, closed it behind him. His uncle greeted him warmly, but Ethan couldn't shake the unease he felt. The silence outside was oppressive. That evening, as they sat talking, a bell tolled at exactly 7:05 p.m. The sound echoed ominously through the empty village. Ethan asked his uncle about the bell, and what he heard next chilled him to the bone. "There's a curse on Crow Hollow," his uncle whispered. "Every Tuesday evening, the Crow Man, a vengeful spirit, roams the village. The small door of every house must remain open, or the spirit will curse the men inside." Panic gripped Ethan. He remembered closing the small door when he entered. His uncle's face turned pale as he realized the gravity of Ethan's mistake. But before they could act, a guttural growl and the faint buzzing of crows filled the air. The small door burst open on its own. What stood on the threshold was no human being. The Crow Man had decaying grey skin, fiery red eyes, and hair like tangled weeds. His body was surrounded by a swarm of black crows, and he moved with an unnatural floating gait. The Crow Man lunged at Ethan, throwing him across the room with inhuman strength. When Ethan regained consciousness, the villagers had gathered around him. His back throbbed with unbearable pain. Reaching behind, he felt a grotesque hump that hadn't been there before. His uncle's voice trembled as he explained, "You've been cursed, Ethan. Within 13 days, the Crow Man will claim your life." Terrified and in pain, Ethan called his best friend, Jake. Jake arrived 2 days later, bringing with him a local exorcist. The exorcist examined Ethan and declared that the Crow Man's spirit was tied to an ancient scarecrow in the village fields. "If we can destroy the scarecrow," the exorcist said, "we might break the curse." The exorcist began rituals to trap the Crow Man. For 2 days, he prayed and performed ceremonies at the scarecrow's location. But on the second night, the Crow Man appeared in all his fury. The scarecrow came to life, its wooden arms moving unnaturally, and it strangled the exorcist before anyone could intervene. Ethan and Jake fled, realizing that the Crow Man's power was beyond anything they could comprehend. Desperate to save his friend, Jake decided to take Ethan far away from the village. They drove toward Lexington, hoping that distance would weaken the curse. But as they approached the village's boundary, their car stalled. The buzzing of crows returned, louder than ever, and the Crow Man appeared, floating ominously in front of them. Jake made a split-second decision. He stepped out of the car to distract the Crow Man, yelling for Ethan to run. The Crow Man chased Jake with supernatural speed. Ethan watched in horror as the spirit caught his friend, snapped his neck in midair, and let his lifeless body drop to the ground. The Crow Man turned back to Ethan, but this time, he vanished into the shadows, leaving Ethan paralyzed with grief and terror. Over the next week, the Crow Man tormented Ethan relentlessly. Every night, the spirit dragged him out of his home and threw him against the doors of different houses in the village. The villagers watched in silence, too afraid to intervene. Ethan's hump grew larger and his body became weaker with each passing day. On the 13th day, the entire village knew what was coming. As the clock struck 7:05 p.m., the bell tolled once more. A violent wind swept through the streets, and the buzzing of crows signaled the Crow Man's arrival. The villagers heard Ethan's blood-curdling screams, but dared not leave their homes. By morning, Ethan's lifeless body was found near his uncle's house, his back twisted and deformed. The story doesn't end with Ethan. Weeks later, another villager, Sam, made the same mistake of closing the small door. But Sam's wife, Claire, was determined not to lose her husband. She contacted Victor, a renowned paranormal investigator, to confront the Crow Man and end the curse once and for all. Victor uncovered an ancient ritual that could bind the Crow Man's spirit permanently. The villagers were skeptical. Some feared provoking the spirit further, while others saw this as their only chance for freedom. As Victor prepared for the final confrontation, the air in Crow Hollow grew thick with tension. Would this be the end of the Crow Man's reign of terror, or would the curse claim more lives? The curse of Crow Hollow is more than just a tale, it's a warning. To this day, Crow Hollow remains shrouded in mystery, its houses still bearing the peculiar design of two doors. The villagers continue to live in fear, their lives governed by the rules of the curse. And as for the Crow Man, his presence lingers, a reminder that some spirits are never truly at rest. Would you dare to visit Crow Hollow and face the curse of the Crow Man? Or will you heed the warnings and leave the small door open?